Hey, welcome! In this lesson, I'll walk you through the basics of UI design in Figma. I'll show you how to set up your first interface, work with frames, and get comfortable with the essential tools. Today, I'm going to show you how to build a very simple app from scratch, and I'll walk you through some of the basic techniques that most designers use. Even if you have no experience in design, this should be extremely useful for you. The very first thing that I want to show you is the ideation, meaning that what is the app you're going to build? The first thing you will want to do is to browse through some initial ideas. Those are typically your most used app. When you use iOS, when you utilize the App Store, what do you typically download? And quite often, you generally want to imitate an app that you personally use yourself. So for example, a weather app, a fitness app, or a health tracking app, or perhaps a Bitcoin app if you are into crypto. In terms of the ideation process, use the most common app that most people use. Now let's talk about various UI patterns and inspiration. You should go to Dribbble because Dribbble is where all the best designers in the world they meet and they build very cool experiments in terms of animations and basic UI. And also there's a website I like to use. It's called Mobbin. And in terms of UX, if you don't know what UX is, it's when you talk about the experience. Like, is it a sign-up page? What is the pattern? Where should you put the button? What is the menus going to look like? So for example, you look at some of the popular apps such as Balances or Target or whatever, you're going to see the different categories of apps such as education. You're going to need, then you search by patterns category for example, PayPal. What does it look like? What kind of screens that we have for PayPal? So here, in terms of user experience, you have to be able to identify precisely what these common patterns are and what are the most common types of screens that we typically see within this application. This, for example, is commonly called a user onboarding screen. And a user onboarding experience is when you first land on the app, and it's explaining to you in detail what this particular app is truly all about. For example, you can see here it has beautiful graphics and it has some text, a title, and some dots. And it shows you can log in, you can sign up, and this is super easy to design. I would probably start with this if you're a beginner because it allows for more creativity versus the in-app screen, such as entering a cell phone it's typically more boring. So if you want to use your creativity, definitely onboarding is a pretty good pattern to start with. You can see Dharma. I don't really know this app, but you can see that you have a bunch of patterns and you can use your creativity. So deciding in on what app you want to build, what screens you want to build, this is what I would do. And then getting a bit more into the specific details, right? So what fonts should you actually use? If you're just starting out, you should definitely use San Francisco because it's the default system font. If you're building for Android, it should be Roboto. And if you want to be more adventurous, which I do not recommend if you have very little experience in UI design, for example, I would go with the safer route like Roboto, which is for Android, and Spline Sun or something that is safer, something that is readable and easy to digest, such as Poppins, Montserrat. Or you can simply search in Google for like the top fonts for effective UI design. Typically, you're definitely going to find a really nice list of fonts that you should consider using as it is highly recommended by most professional designers. And so that's what I would do because typography represents about 90% of every UI design. That's why the font is so important. Now let's go into more details. Apple Design Resource. If you're building an I/O app design, then you want to use something like a sketch library you want to download for iOS. You're going to have like basic patterns in terms of the iOS language, and you want to be consistent with the platform so that what you design is not completely different and you respect the rules. So you want to learn also the iOS design guidelines, okay? And of course, there's a lot of stuff that you're going to want to read, but the main thing you want to read about is visual design and colors. So colors, just pick whatever one of these colors, and then you want to go into maybe material if you want to go. But typically, colors and typography are the two most important things that you need to know as a beginner. That's it, right? You don't want to read the whole thing. You're going to get bored. You're going to sleep. You will want to start very, very simply. And then once you have these essential resources, you can confidently head to Figma, and you're certainly going to go to the community, and you're going to start diligently searching for some of these excellent examples that you can thoroughly explore and carefully analyze. But most importantly, you should definitely start with the comprehensive iOS 15 UI kit. And this is a truly great one that you should definitely download, and you're going to be able to look at all of the various components that comes with it. The same way you can use the one by Apple, you can also get this one, which is created by the community, and it has every single detail to create that design that you want. Sure, you're a designer, you want to get more creative. This might be a little bit too boring and too normal, but when you do UI design, you have to understand that there's two facets of it, the creative part and the UX part. And you have to master both aspects. You can't just decide, all right, let's go wild and throw in a bunch of colors and tons of different artworks all at once. It doesn't make any sense, because then you don't think about the functionality. You don't think about how it's going to affect the user experience. And what are the design systems, the fonts, the typography, the colors, and how do you ship that to engineers so that they understand what you're trying to achieve with your design? So that's precisely why you need to quickly look at this at a glance and then apply that to your overall design. Some of the interesting things to look at is the color system. For example, we have the colors for dark mode and light mode, and the home screen, the typography. It's pretty important to understand these concepts from a basic foundational level. So the three most important elements are a large title, and then the main body text, and then if you want to go even smaller, you can use a footnote or a caption. And then if you want to have more variation to the title, then you have the title 1 to 3. In every single screen, you're going to see the body text and the large title. Those are the two most important things. And sometimes you have the variation with the bold and non-bold. So going back to the community, we're going to have a bunch of UI that you should look at. You can build a website or you can build an app. If you're starting out, I would suggest building an app because an app is way easier. You have a smaller screen. It's more interesting. You can show it to people instead of asking them to go to your computer. It's also much easier with Swift UI to start an app and put that on your phone versus building a website and then dealing with a lot of platforms. Unless you're using Code Sandbox. But then again, Code Sandbox is more for experimentation. Then you have to pay for services like Netlify and stuff like that. Making an application is a lot easier. You should definitely download some of these design screens, such as those specifically for iOS design. So you can see we have a bunch of examples here, and you can see that it always starts with just one or two screens. Don't complicate things. Go with what excites you. Give yourself a deadline. Don't try to spend like an entire month on this, because you will eventually lose all hope. You will want to quit. You will want to give up, and that's really not good. So you can see that most of these designs, for anyone who has a bit of experience, typically take maybe a maximum of a day to design. And if you have more experience, this should realistically take an hour or two. When it comes to UI design, you're not supposed to do most things from scratch. A UI designer's primary job is not simply to create icons, backgrounds, and illustrations from scratch, but rather to focus on the overall user experience. Their job is to make things together so that the user experience makes sense, so that people can use it. And so that is the goal. That is what you should be focusing at. What is the typography? What are the colors for the branding? What is the menu looking like? And so that's basically it. Let's put that into practical application. We're going to create a brand new design file. So let's take a careful look at one of the super simple screen designs. You have this particular one or this other one. So the onboarding screen and then the main screen. 2 screens, super simple. For someone who has a little bit more experience, this probably take an hour. And for someone who has less experience, probably is going to make multiple IT iterations and probably take a day or two. But this is not, from an execution standpoint, this is not complicated. So you're going to create a brand new screen within an iPhone 13. And so you're going to want to go to this particular design kit. Why is that exactly? Because we need some of the basic components such as the tab bar, so the status bar and home indicator. You're going to want to go to the team library and publish this. And once I have that, I'm going to be able to go and enable that particular feature, such as this one here. And I'm going to be able to search for the status bar element. And I'm going to bring that over to my UI design. I will then adjust that accordingly. So now I have this, and then I also want to include the home indicator as well. And voila. Right? So essentially every single screen is going to look like this from a very fundamental base level. Now, what exactly is it that I'm going to build here? Honestly, I don't know. Maybe meditate a bit so that you feel less stress. I'm just inventing ideas on the fly, and this is my working title for now. Because it's iOS, you want to make it big enough. And typically, you would really need to know what are the specific size dimensions, and going back to the large title. It is something you should know by heart, which is approximately 34 points, and also a title is typically bold or heavy. If you know some of the rules, this San Francisco Pro display, and depending on the screen, sometimes you can afford to have bigger title. This 34 titles is mostly for a typical screen with a navigation controller at the top. But otherwise, you can actually get like into 50 even, just like this. Super simple UI design. And then what else? You need illustrations. So, illustrations, you can get them from a website like Shape, or you can also find them in the Figma community as well. Let's search for illustrations. We are so incredibly lucky because so many of these wonderful things are just freely available for us to utilize. And you can easily duplicate this, perhaps use one of these excellent illustrations. For the specific purpose of this particular example, let's thoughtfully use this one and then carefully resize this. Boom. There you indeed go. I have my onboarding screen here, right? Now I just need to add my triple dots. I'm not sure if they're actually called dots, but I'm going to duplicate this element, right? So for now, this one is not selected. I don't know. Boom. If this particular element is lacking sufficient contrast, you can always add a little bit of vibrant colors, and you can easily make a beautiful gradient. And you can then switch the gradient, and now we effectively have excellent contrast to both the light and the dark areas. And if you want to feel a little bit more adventurous, which again depends on your level of experience, you can definitely add some colors. Let's say you want to use one of the iOS colors. So let me go over here, and I'm going to use maybe not something super flashy, but let's pick this blue, which is actually super popular as a color in iOS design. I can put that as a background, and then boom, I have something a little bit more colorful. To contrast well, I can make it white. And the same applies for the visual label for the status bar. So we can simply choose between a light mode and a dark mode. And that entire functionality is all thanks to the powerful UI kit. And so here, obviously, we don't want to use gray. We want to use black or white. And we also want to use transparency so that it fits better against any color. So now we have something that looks a little bit better. Also, the spacing between these, we can use auto layout. So let me group these elements together. I'm going to add an auto layout, and then I can precisely control the spacing, setting it to, let's say, 12. And as you get better with UI design, you know the basics of spacing, such as using the 4-point grid or the 8-point grid. But again, you don't need to know those things as a beginner. Don't worry about it. So that's the first screen. The second screen that we are looking at is the browse screen, right? So if we go back to our initial inspiration, the very first rule of designing is to not copy everything. So you are allowed to copy the UX. When I say the UX, like exactly where things are placed. You're supposed to copy the UX because the tab bar is always at the bottom. The button's always at the top right or top left, and this is what an onboarding screen looks like. You're supposed to copy that. What you're not supposed to copy is exactly the same colors, the same text, the same illustration. You're not allowed to do that. So if I'm looking here, you can see that, okay, so I have a tab bar. It has, a bunch of icons. I have the menu right here, and I also have my layout clearly defined here. I have my button positioned here. So let's proceed with that now. I'm going to remove this, and all I really need to do is use one of the available icons. So what do I typically use for icons? I can use, if I want to be consistent with iOS, I can use SF Symbols, which has so many icons completely for free, provided by Apple. And so I can use Home, and I can then copy this. And you need to make absolutely sure to use SF Pro, otherwise it's not going to work correctly. So you're going to paste that, and you're going to use the font size to about 17, which is the body size, and boom. So this is typically your typical size icon, but you can make it bigger if you don't have a text, but I would definitely suggest to have the text. But let's say for the purpose of this demo, we don't have a text. We want to be a little bit more creative. We're going to have about 3 icons, much like this, and we definitely want to use auto layout. Boom. And it's consistently spaced, exactly 80. We want to center this, and then we're going to have like different icons such as, let's say, a grid. I don't really know, something along these lines. Boom. And then you can search. There you go, right there. Boom. My menu's there. Or you can have different colors for the background, black or white. You can also play with different shades of gray. So for example, you have a tab bar that is different colors, so you want to use visual hierarchy for that. You can have background for your tab bar that is a little bit lighter. Make sure that it's very subtle. Just like in real life, when you look at things, it's not like super contrasty. It is very subtle, the shadows, the tone. And I'm going to make that adjustment below, and I am going to set it to approximately 5% or even 10% using pure white. Or let's say 5%. There you go. You now have the menu that has a little bit of an accent. Here we can set the card for the content, which is quite useful. We can also have the button. So the button, you should know a little bit about the rules, such as what is the size. So what I recommend is to carefully look at the UI kit and measure various things. Once you measure these things, you're going to have a lot more confidence in terms of what is this going to look like in terms of its actual size and overall visual presentation. So for example, this action button, which is supposed to take more space, is about 60 in terms of height, but this one is 42. Now the magic number for iOS is 44. And that is the average because the size of the fingers matters. We want to be able to use it properly and comfortably. So going back to my design, I'm going to set this to about 50 or 60. And I also want to have maybe some nice rounded corners. So I'll set those to 20. You can also use the iOS rounded corners. So this is the super ellipses, we call them. You can set it to 60, and then you can use the same color, or you want to make it more poppy depending on the importance of that button. And then you set a button. So for example, sign up. And depending on the size of the button, it's going to be more or less. You can also utilize the text styles. If you have used that as a library from iOS, you can use the text style from iOS. So for example, you can use something like headline, or you can use title 3. And there you go. This is specifically for the button sign up for free. You can easily set it to be perfectly centering, and also you can set this particular element as an auto layout as well. And auto layout, what is truly cool about that is that you can consistently change the size to always be perfectly consistent. So for example, if I want the padding to always be a consistent 10-10 from top to bottom, and if I want the overall size of the button too, to always have a very consistent spacing such as 10-30-30, then whenever I meticulously change the size of the text, it's going to automatically expand by default, and that's really quite cool. But in this case, my button's always going to be the same size. But I just wanted to show you that this is possible, and these are some of the cool techniques. You can also add drop shadows to the button, so like this. And then you can use maybe a 20 and a 10, so now you have a little bit of a subtle glow. And now we have the content that you can readily use. You have many different types of content that you can easily browse through. So we can set it to 20. And here I'm going to set it to a deep black for now. So this is my content. And then I can have some illustrations to be part of that content. And then I'm going to make it bigger so that it fits for each of those cards, like this. And then you have some title. When I'm short on time, I like to copy and paste, as you can see here. Don't worry, and it's always about how much time that you actually have in front of you, especially if the text is supposed to be a prominent title or just body text. In this particular case, because it's part of a card, then it's definitely going to be a title. And you will want to use the bold version, so it's going to be title 1. You will want to align it to the left, and something like this, and boom. I'm going to make this appear below, and then sometimes you have a second text, and now I'm going to use the body text, and it's not going to be bold at all. Typically, a body text is not bold, and so it's going to look like this. Also, you will want to use different colors between the title. You can also use transparency, 70% for example. Now we have a bit of a difference in hierarchy between the two, and it's going to look a little bit like this. You can group everything together. This is now a card. And once you have a card, you can really change that card the way you want. And so depending on your content, it's going to look more or less like this. And of course, you can use auto layout so we don't end up with a problem like this. You can see with auto layout, I'm going to be able to do this, and then when it resizes, it's less problematic. You know, of the card, you can make it. Depends how many cards do you want to show. If you have more cards to show, maybe you want to use cards next to each other, like this. And if you have fewer cards, then you'll want to make the cards sit next to each other like this. Of course, this depends on all of those different factors. This idea definitely applies here, so you can just use a mask for that. So I'm going to use as a mask. The problem with a mask is that it cannot have a background color. So I'm going to have to duplicate that and then disable the mask. This will result in 2 layers, one a mask and another that is not. And now I have a perfectly sized card. So, second card, and maybe I'm going to make these ones smaller cards. Don't want to get too much into the details. Those are the kind of things that you can work with, and you can definitely change the illustrations. And what's still missing here are the titles. Right? And this time it's going to be like maybe title 3. And as the final part on the screen, latest loads. There you go. And you don't always have to use exactly the very same color. And when the card is smaller, you can use a smaller title such as this. It's going to fit a lot better, but you have to be consistent, right? So you can't just have a different structure every single card. So if this size for the text is 125, then this C size for the text is also 125. So I can also utilize a 70% opacity setting, and there you have it. I'm going to position the app bar to be prominently in the foreground. I need to ensure that I also have the background properly aligned with me, because due to the application of opacity, it's not displaying correctly. Therefore, I'm going to employ the eyedropper tool to rectify this. And there you go, you have 2 screens that were made in about 15 minutes, and you learned how to come from the initial ideation phase to gathering resources, to thoroughly studying, and then finally creating something from scratch. So I truly hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining me. If you want to sharpen your skills, check out my next video, where I dig deeper into practical UI design techniques.